I enjoy my humble Star Wars Black Series collection, but every time I look at this shelf, I feel a bit bored, a bit underwhelmed. These figures represent one of the most imaginative and expansive universes ever created by the human mind, and me, a miniature world builder, just have them standing on a shelf. It's time to make a Star Wars display that isn't boring. I'm making a riser diorama, and this is the story of how I did it. In classic Star Wars fashion, my weapon of choice for this build is a laser. Not that kind of laser. This kind of laser. The xTool S1 diode laser cutter. The Star Wars aesthetic is all about clean precision, and that's exactly what the xTool S1 offers me. So I've designed a diorama that will be comprised almost completely of laser cut pieces, and it's made to fit right here in my IKEA Calyx. I originally designed this diorama as a 3D model, thinking that I would have to later figure out how to recreate its components in Adobe Illustrator or a similar program, but to my genuine delight, I noticed that Tinkercad, the program I used to design this, had a new export for laser cutting setting options available. Yahoo! So I exported all my pieces as SVG files, fired up the laser, and got my materials ready. The S1 can cut many different materials, but ultimately I decided to get some 1/8 inch MDF sheets and 1/16 inch black acrylic sheets for this build, courtesy of North Carolina-based Smokey Hill Designs. Most of my cuts need to be made in the MDF, so I started there, cutting 35 diorama components with the laser. The S1 made quick work of these, making all the cuts in under 40 minutes, but I discovered a problem during the cutting process. The way I was exhausting my fumes was less than ideal. Okay, it was actually pretty bad. So bad that my air purification system was registering some concerning air quality numbers.
We're doomed.
Luckily, I was wearing a mask in the shop during these cuts, but I knew I needed to get this taken care of before trying to cut the acrylic, which I definitely didn't want to breathe in fumes of. After some measurements, a little 3D printing, and some light MDF laser cutting, I had this solution, which vastly reduced the air quality numbers during the cutting process to much safer levels. Meaning the S1 can now make quick and safe work of these black acrylic sheets. And with that, all my laser cutting for this project was done. Time now to glue some of my Star Wars-esque details to the face of the riser diorama, which I did with this wood glue. Because precision is so important to the Star Wars look, I used a T-square to ensure I was gluing things down square. Although I did have to eyeball some of these smaller pieces, in the end I think everything lined up nicely. I felt that spray painting this diorama would be my easiest path, but I forgot one thing. MDF doesn't take paint well. So after looking up several solutions on YouTube, I decided I needed to seal the MDF before spray painting. All you have to do is apply the wood stain to the areas you want to paint and let dry. I did 2 coats on all of my pieces. After letting things breathe for 24 hours, I was ready to spray paint these with Rust-Oleum Slate Gray, a color I love using for Star Wars dioramas. In fact, I used the same color on my Luke Skywalker diorama, which you can watch on my channel. In that build, I also used these Dollar Tree vegetable cutting mats as my opaque Star Wars windows, which I decided to use again in this build. I just cut them to size and then used a combination of wood glue and clear acrylic glue to permanently bond it to the MDF, which wasn't the best choice because the wood glue doesn't dry clear. So I used some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip to clear up that dried on glue in my pill-shaped windows. While I let that dry, I switched my focus to building the structure of the riser diorama using these handy 90-degree woodworking squares and some wood glue. I got these on Amazon. These things really help me align things perfectly to ensure a rigid and strong structure. For extra stability, I also attached these MDF pieces to the feature wall of the diorama, which needed to be clamped down to dry for a while. I also thought adding in these pre-cut XPS foam pieces would help increase the strength of this piece, so I placed several strategically throughout the underbelly of the riser. For this part, I used Hotwire Foam Factory Styro Glue, which in my opinion is the best glue for bonding XPS to anything. This looks ugly, but when it's finished, it won't be visible. Then it was time to glue the feature wall to the structure using wood glue. I made sure to take my time here, because if this wasn't glued on precisely, it would really take away from the finished product. This glue needed to set in place for a few hours, so I turned the diorama on its side and used my carpenter squares to weigh this down and hold it in place while it dried. When all that dried, it was time to start assembling the visible exterior steps of the riser. First, I glued on the front plates. Then I peeled off the protective sheeting on the black acrylic and glued that in place using the wood glue. I weighed down the acrylic while the glue set using some full spray paint cans. After that dried, I turned the diorama over so I could start installing the functional lighting for the diorama, which I plan to do with this remote powered LED strip kit that I purchased on Amazon. My goal was to make the lighting setup as simple as possible using as few strips as possible in combination with these longer connection wires. If you've never used these cuttable LEDs before, they're pretty easy to work with. You just cut the designated area, then cut away the protective coating that the LED is encased in, attach the connection piece to the corresponding prongs, and you're good to go. These have an adhesive on the underside, which I use to fix the strips in place. This strip is going to light the front area under the first riser step. I designed this so I could thread the LEDs and connection pieces through either side of the diorama, which worked out exactly as I had hoped. With the connector threaded through, I flipped the diorama back over and turned my attention to lighting the feature wall of the diorama. Using the adhesive side of the strip, I outlined the perimeter of the windowed area of the wall and then tested the connection, which worked perfectly. I don't fully trust the strength of this adhesive long term, and the way that I designed this, I won't be able to access the lighting after this is finished. So I decided to put a layer of packing tape over top of all the LED strips. Hopefully that holds up long term. I use wood glue to permanently fix the power supply to the inside of the riser. The lights are working as planned, but I want them to glow bright and cool. So I cut some dollar store foam board to size and glued it behind both windowed areas of the diorama. Then I glued the riser onto its base, and then did the same with my logoed backplate. And with that, my riser diorama was complete. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have a Humble Black Series collection. These are almost all of my Star Wars figures, but the cool thing is with this riser diorama, I can display almost everyone on one shelf. Or if I so choose, I can switch up my display to specific Star Wars groups like my Jedi, Mandalorian series figures, Star Wars video game figures, characters from the original trilogy, Stormtrooper Squad, or I can get situational with something like the High Ground. That's the reason I designed this diorama the way I did. I didn't want to get too specific to any one movie or iconic scene because I wanted it to have a general Star Wars appeal. And if you like this design and want to laser cut one for yourself, the SVG files for laser cutting are now available for select tiers on my Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my patrons. I appreciate all of you. I'm so happy with how this came out and extremely grateful to have my xTool S1, which made making this diorama an absolute joy. Huge thanks to xTool for sending me the S1 and for sponsoring this video. Speaking of xTool, I am an xTool affiliate, so if you'd like to get yourself an xTool S1, any other laser cutter they offer, or accessories to enhance laser cutting in your shop, like the xTool Safety Pro AP2, which would have solved my fume exhaust problem if I owned it. I will receive a small commission at no extra cost to you if you use the affiliate links in the description. Thanks so much for watching the video. I hope you'll hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and watch my other Star Wars diorama build videos.
Vasco Toys. Action figure dioramas and props.